A somewhat illuminating mess. Gamergate on stage at Airplay. An opinion piece written by Daniel Nye Griffiths. Normally, when I introduce a video with the title of a piece, I'm going to be picking through that piece. I will a bit, but I have a bigger point to make. And to do that, I'm going to be looking at Daniel's participation in Gamergate since last August, and also events prior to Gamergate. I think this guy is a good example of the exact kind of mindset that caused Gamergate to explode. He holds the kind of viewpoint that made what happened happen, an instigator of the Streisand effect. But before I get onto that, there is one specific thing I want to address in his piece. With this in mind, it's actually very refreshing to see representatives of Gamergate elected by Gamergate to represent Gamergate, making it perfectly clear that this is part of a culture war. While this is an opinion piece, that is a factual claim, isn't it? Representatives of Gamergate elected by Gamergate. And yeah, there are people who say, I'm Gamergate, those are my representatives. However, unless I'm mistaken, they were picked through Michael Koretsky appointing a committee and then the committee picking them. This means it's just down to those people's interpretation of how they can do that. It doesn't necessarily mean they actually represent Gamergate, whatever it is. If Gamergate voted for it, I wonder if the author of the piece could name the members who voted. And if he can't, how the fuck does he know that it's Gamergate voting for Gamergate representatives? Or perhaps he means that those who put in their feedback for who should represent Gamergate are Gamergate, and that's what makes them Gamergate. In which case, this is a brand new group, defined by that, and simply taking the name Gamergate. And if those points are too wanky or flowery, how did Ash Scow get on the panel? She was basically a last-minute replacement. Certainly not elected by Gamergate if you think Gamergate is a group of people. Unless, of course, you believe Gamergate is Alum Bakari, Michael Koretsky, and John Smith. But, of course, it's in this guy's interest to label people he doesn't like as being leaders of the Goobleglorps, because he has that whole progressive original sin thing going on, and came off, quite frankly, villainously when I saw him discussing guilt by association. I guess one can get upset about guilt by association, but I guess a lot there depends on one's perspective and priorities. So what is his priority? What comes first for this guy? In a 2013 article of his called Not the Top 5 Indie Games of 2013, he mentioned Zoe Quinn and Wizard Chan, and then wrote something interesting in response to someone in the comments. If you'd like me to write more about the harassment of women in the video games industry, I am again happy to take that on board. There's a tension there between being an ally and drowning out women's voices that needs to be negotiated, of course, but in general I want to do my part to push for harassment and unprovoked aggression to be less acceptable in general, within and without gaming. So what is it that these allies do? They pick a woman, one they agree with, one they like, politically align with I guess. It never applies to those they disagree with, and they do the whole, "Milady, I offer you my voice." And he did this just in this opinion piece. What is left for the mainstream is probably the odd human interest piece and reportage on specific events. Meanwhile, the harassment that for many has come to characterize the reporting on Gamergate will continue to do so because, as we found once again over the weekend, threats to life and property are a compelling hook in a way that 10,000-word manifesti are not. Anyone interested in seeing how this all looks from a very different perspective might find this recent piece by Zoe Quinn relevant. His Forbes piece is really just a plug for Zoe Quinn. To put it kindly, he is a fanboy. To put it less kindly, he is a mega cuck. And nothing he says that isn't just a fact, any opinion he holds is fucking worthless. It's not really his opinion, it's his duty. And prior to the coining of the Gamergate tag, he put forward her wishes as well, but only through his Twitter account. But perhaps the reason he didn't write somewhere else was because her wish was for him not to. Statement from @TheQuinspiracy. This has nothing to do with games and is not a matter of legitimate public interest. Whereas now that she's trying to get attention for Con, he plugs her promotional post in his writing. Underneath that tweet I just showed you, there was a short conversation, and the key part of it, the bit that is part of what led to Gamergate blowing up, the attitude, is here. UVW Maps said, "Just disappointed we can't talk about corruption regarding sites that are so gung-ho about issues that need solving." Daniel Griffiths replies, "One major thing that stops that conversation being viable is the frenzied harassment of women. Women are harassed, therefore a conversation about failings of news websites is not viable. You cannot have it. you cannot speak about something. And they didn't speak about it, perhaps because Quinn said, don't. Maybe they are all good allies like this man, but even those apparently sympathetic to Quinn realized that this may not have been the best idea. I think the silence from established media did more bad than good, certainly played into people's conspiracies about industry and press collusion. And it fucking did, didn't it? As did the nuking on Reddit of people trying to talk about it to protect Milady, and the banning of it from 4chan. The biggest things in making it explode. I've said what the worst thing was, what the press did, but the thing that made it explode was the pressure to not talk about it, a result of the apparent prevalence of Daniel Nye Griffith's viewpoint among people of influence. Just to reiterate for anyone who might misinterpret, I'm not saying you've done any of this, I'm just saying he is a good case study. So anyway, this thread where the guy's saying their silence made it worse, refusing to even talk about issues of collusion or failure to disclose. It led to comment from Daniel that I think explains a lot of people's religious hate boners for anything called Gamergate, why they are so triggered by it. Daniel writes, transparency and disclosure are important. However, let's not imagine this current episode is about that. Samuel Fianti says, it should, but it was derailed into crude shouting and crude defending and having two camps. Daniel. And then it became part of a small section of the internet's ongoing war on women in video games. But that was prior to the coining of Gamergate. Why does that matter? Well, I mentioned original sin. Elsewhere on Twitter he wrote, the initial breach of privacy was so egregious that everything that came from it is fruit from a poison tree. If he can hunt you down and find out that any of your concerns with the press at all have any tangential connection to last August, regardless of what you're talking about, he needs to know that you are tainted from having eaten the forbidden fruit, so he can disregard any opinion you have, or any information you bring to light. In fact, actually, to have reacted to the Zoe post in any way whatsoever is a problem. Cranch said, this is more TMZ celebrity gossip than constitutional case. Regardless though, it doesn't mean people can't react, Daniel says. Except they aren't celebs. Before the Streisanding, Quinn was making, what, 18k a year from Patreon? I mean, absolutely, people can react. Lots of people are. That's not a neutral act, is all I'm saying. It looks like he puts the Streisand effect on the back of people who don't just agree to not look at things that are being silenced, and didn't seem to be aware that it's his kind of attitude that causes that to happen. But you know, if you go have a peep when God, the games press tells you not to, you're tainted. You should have obeyed. They didn't talk about it, so you shouldn't have known about it. Okay, so maybe that isn't fair. Maybe one of his internet buddies will reach out and convert you. You can have your sin wiped away. After the Gamergate tag was coined, L. Rhodes wrote, there are gators whose minds could be changed about the overall effect of their efforts, right up until someone demonizes them for caring. JD Stout responds, this tweet reads differently just after reading the Shadow of Mordor Nemesis system critique. Daniel says, on the other hand, is it realistic to try to persuade the internet as a whole to soft soap how it feels about something? L. Rhodes says, no, but individuals may listen and start to think differently. Dan responds, well, this is a problem with ally outreach. On the other hand, one is not the primary target, so it's easier to stay calm. So this guy, who is very clearly now a weird dude, was involved in strategizing against what he saw as a tainted horde, and now seems quite dedicated to hunting down those who carry the mark, or perhaps even marking them himself when it's convenient. I believe this post refers to David Auerbach, who he has had a problem with I think since September when he posted an article about Gamergate. A Gamergate quote-unquote neutral, sending his GG fans to hassle people until they apologize for suggesting he supports Gamergate equals suboptimal branding. Oh, and go on, one more little tidbit just for fun. God, but exactly, that's what people are getting from this, that games are an unsafe environment for women. Well, speaking from personal experience, they are, responds Lee Alexander. Right. Jack Thompson and co were peddling myths, half-truths and nostrums. This is data here. As I said, not really looking at the article, but rather providing context as to where this opinion is coming from, as I think that's more important in this instance. You know it's horrific, but I strongly recommend reading it anyway. I think it will come off to you as more of a strategic than sincere opinion. But, as usual, that's just another one of my harmful opinions.